Firstly, thank you all so much for being here. It really means a lot. My name is Matt Klein. I am a cultural researcher, strategist, and writer, and it is an incredibly special honor to be kicking off this conversation and Q&A. We're here to celebrate the 15th anniversary of Program or Be Programmed, arguably one of the most foundational books on digital literacy. Program or Be Programmed originally offered 10 commands to intentionally navigate the biases of our digital technologies. Now, a decade and a half since its original release, Program or Be Programmed, for better or worse, is more important than it has ever been, especially in the context of AI, the newest and 11th command in the re-released version, which was published earlier this week. In prepping for this chat, I came across an online review that I think perhaps best describes the intent and value of this work. Now, mind you, this is a random review from Amazon from Nathan G 15 years ago, and I think Nathan nails it. So thank you, Nathan G. Nathan writes, "What makes this book worthy of the Neil Postman Award that it won, I just learned that such an award exists," this is Nathan speaking, "is its refusal to let any digital technology become transparent. From the first ARPANET connections to email, to the ubiquitous vibrating phones and phantom phone buzz syndrome, Rushkoff keeps his sharp eye on the assumptions that one has to make before the technology makes any sense. That one should adjust one's personal biological rhythms to the atemporal always-on existence of computer networks rather than vice versa. That the world should conform its complexity to the reductionism of binary choices, and that human beings are meant to exist as infinitesimal nodes in a vast global network, just to name three. Spelling out those assumptions, Rushkoff does not so much give 10 commands as ask 10 penetrating questions that ought to haunt human beings as we jump on board the internet train." So now, 15 years later, we are clearly and certainly haunted by these questions, and the internet train feels to be hijacked, burning, barreling, and completely off its tracks. Program or Be Programmed is a time machine to a moment of opportunity 15 years ago. At the time, a chance to pre-read the rules of engagement in order to mindfully approach our tech. For me, rereading this work in 2024, in addition to its new text, elicited a total spectrum of emotions. On one side, sweet relief that these biases are all laid out for us. There is no mystery. We know what our tech wants from us. But yet, on the other side of that spectrum, utter frustration and, dare I say, resentment, as if we totally blew it. Yet now, excitingly and optimistically, we're presented with another opportunity, another chance to reapply these commands amidst the emergence of AI. So I'm eager to not just continue reflecting upon these commands, but further inquire why we didn't embrace tech's anti-human biases, and ultimately what we can do better this time around. It is not too late. So with that, I'd like to welcome to the Zoom stage window author of Program or Be Programmed, 11 Commands for the AI Future, out this week, Douglas Rushkoff.
Hey, thanks for that. It felt a little bit like it came out of my own head. That's sort of the experience I had on looking back at this. Was like, on the one hand, I was like, oh, wow, all these biases really did come into play. You know, the polarization I was concerned about, the forced choice, and the distractions, selling our friends and all. But we didn't. As a society, we didn't seem to care or recognize them, So in some ways, it was like, oh, it was right, but that was like way early to sort of to explain. But it's like, it's fine. They're all still there. It's just now I feel like people will be able to recognize them more because they're experiencing this in person.
It's a little too obvious. Too obvious at this point. I'm very curious, when this was originally released, what was that vibe? What was the context? Did it feel daring to put these biases out? Did they feel complete out of left field for many people? Or
yeah, I mean, on the one hand, Um, some of the reaction, like from the digital or internet industry, was that I was this, fear mongering, techno dystopian critic. What do Rushkoff thinks that social media is about selling data? What the It's crazy, dude. Obviously, Facebook is here to help us make friends. That's the purpose of Facebook. It's not he's Rushkoff's talking about like monetize the person's social graph. You think anyone at Facebook's really cares about the data that people? It's like, oh, or being upset about them, porting the algorithms from slot machines into social media feeds. Those things that are now basic. People thought I was kind of being a Cassandra, but I guess the bigger problem for me was when the book came out. It was as if we were already in the world that we're in now, where people have lost the ability to understand metaphor. So they understood Programmer Be Programmed as a call to learn to code. And it kind of became the calling card of the kind of code tree, code school, Udacity, STEM. So Rushkoff's arguing that we need more STEM education. And actually what the book would argue is we need more liberal arts education.
The complete opposite.
Right. We need to think more critically. So yes, it's good to know how to code. It's good to know how, at least you should understand enough about programming to know when it's being done. What is this piece of software? What does this platform want from me? But no, but now, I think it's different. Now with the advent of AI, I think AI, whether it works or not, whatever you think it may be, and whichever AI you're thinking about, AI in the public imagination is a good metaphor for living in programmed environments. When I wrote Programmer Be Programmed, people really couldn't get their heads around the idea that when they're on the web, there's algorithms watching what they do and reconfiguring their offerings based on you in real time. That there's a feedback loop, and that for the digital companies, the internet was a Skinner box of behavioral control. Now that people are engaged in sort of prompting and conversing with AIs, now they can really, oh, I get it. This thing wants something from me. So it's a much easier time to communicate the values in this book.
The metaphor bit to me is really interesting in that I was listening to the talks and revisiting the work, and I was shocked by how literal it was originally interpreted. There was another review, and it was something along the lines of just another person trying to put IT workers at the top of the totem pole, which is the
Right. That's the opposite of what the book would say. Right. It's funny. The real intent of the book originally, there was all the liberal arts, humanities, Neil Postman-esque stuff, but from a more like, as a writer, as a more, if you want to think about it more in the landscape of like Freud's Moses and monotheism, like someone writing a book about a thing that you want to last. What I was doing was saying that the migration of humanity from, a broadcast industrial world into the digital distributed world is as profound a leap as moving from oral culture to written culture. So that was why with 10 Commandments, most people don't look at it this way, but the writing of the Torah and the Talmud was largely about people asking, what does it mean that we're moving into a civilization that's going to have text? Right? Our history is no longer this thing that we share orally and remember. Our history is going to be written down. like locked down for everyone to see. The future is no longer, well, I'll see you tomorrow. The future is a contract, a covenant. You can write something now that's going to obligate someone to something 10 years in the future. The paper allows you to own people. Who owns whom? It could organize slavery and all these other ways. And so what they did, you can look at Torah and even Bible as and the Ten Commandments as guidelines for how are we, this oral, migratory, Bedouin, wandering people, going to maintain our values and our humanity in a world where everything gets written down with these weird syllabic characters? So then I was asking the same question. What are we going to do? How do we maintain our humanity as we move forward into this next place? And of course, as a media theorist, I would argue the way we maintain it is by understanding the biases of this media so we can make conscious, willful choices about how we use the technology so we're not used by them, inadvertently instead.
Dare we ask the question and open up the can of worms? Why we may prefer not to become mindful? Or what are those hurdles that prevent us from becoming mindful of those biases? What stands in that way? Is there even an answer?
Yeah, I mean, it's frightening to consider one's own agency. It's I'm learning myself now the difference between how to be responsible for people and how to be responsible to people. And I think once people realize that they have agency, that they have a responsibility, I think they go, uh-oh, you mean I'm responsible for all this? I'm being blamed for all? No. We're saying but we have a responsibility to each other, to nature, to our kids, to the environment. We do. And that's, I think, part of the fear of it. And, there is this Pareto principle that seems to take place. I mean, we've seen it on lots of these media, which is why I think about it, where, I'll always try to create, when I'm advising or thinking about making some interactive thing, I'm always like, let's give the authoring tools to the user so they can make the stuff. And what we always find is that 80% of people don't want to author. They just want to watch the videos, and maybe 20%, if you're lucky, or usually more like 12, actually want to seize the power of the new medium. So that's kind of the case now. We're moving into a programmatic universe, and 20% of people want to kind of seize what that means. What does it mean to program my own reality? And 80% just want default. And don't want to think about it, partly because it's a pain and partly because it forces questions about what do you actually want in your life.
I think it's a significant signal of just our current moment. It's not externalization, but this, no, thank you. It's discomfort more than anything of just complete over.
Yeah.
A little bit. And I mean, the bone that I have to pick with, I think it's related, of just the unplugging bit, burn your phone type of thing. That to me is more of an active defeat than anything else, which is how do you find the ability to show up mindfully, productively, with better habits, rather than just, we're too weak. We're too weak to exist. That to me is, I don't know, it's a bummer.
Right. I mean, it depends where you draw the line. I mean, like I stopped using Twitter X. And I mean, I guess partly it's a sign of privilege, right? That I don't have to use it or something. But it just seemed to me, so here's this, completely controlled, total propagandistic environment where a guy is publishing his own thoughts, pushing them on everybody, and creating an environment where being a thinking human being seems like you're an anomaly. Even if you're having a thoughtful thread, this stuff comes in to just prove, hey, while you think you're having this kind of progressive intellectual talk, the real world is all trolls and screw you. And it seemed every time I used it, I felt worse about the world and myself and the things. And I'm like, I don't need that. That's different than deciding I'm not going to use anything. I'm not going to
Yes.
participate at all, and it's not that bad, right? You can still go on the well. You can still create a Discord. There's still closed pools. And I think people need to distinguish between when does the thing you say have to be said to everybody in the world, right? It turns out most of the time you don't need that, right? You can say it to your 200 or 300 people that are in the community or the thing that you're in and actually have a conversation. It's like, do you want to be in the ocean all the time? Or do you ever want to be in a tide pool where things can germinate and grow? And I'm, and it's not just because I'm older, I'm enjoying the tide pools because I just don't want to be subjected to the friggin' random waves all the time. It's just not... no progress.
It's a lot. I want to pick up on that and bring it back to being programmed. From what you've written, or from how it sounds, this past summer, you were caught in the spin cycle of the podcast, Substack, post content whirlwind. I find myself too often programmed, getting demanded for more and more and more, whether that be other people or whether that be myself. How did you turn off that spin cycle? What did it take to say, okay, wait, I'm caught up in this. Perhaps I am programmed by my media.
For me, it took a willingness to risk everything. Right? So, like you say, I mean, I in the good old days, I know this sounds freaking insane. A journalist could get a contract with a magazine for like a year or two. And this is what I would do. I say, Rushkoff, we want you to write, 1,000 words or a 1,500 word piece about technology and society once a month. And we'll give you like $3,000, like $2 a word to do this thing. And you would have that, and you might have a publisher, or I got a gig doing commentaries for NPR, and between 3 or 4 things, there's enough money to live your life through these sort of entities. And I was lucky to get under the wire so I could depend on a lot of these entities, but the entities are pretty much all gone. And as a journalist, even a super respectable place like The Atlantic, you can write a 1,000-word piece for $200, and it's like, oh man, how am I going to live? So I, like many, migrated to the self-funded beg for your supper, platforms. So, Patreon for the podcast and Substack. I moved from Medium, where I used to get paid, to Substack to make my own little thing. And I can feel, and we don't need to go into the cues of it, but the between the business models and the way ads work and the way subscriptions work, I can feel Substack wanting 2 pieces a week. And I can feel Patreon wanting at least a podcast and some other content drop a week, and this many cross promotions with other podcasters, and I got to then do 3 Instagram posts and a LinkedIn thing, and I could feel the implied pace of the machine impacting my pace of living. And I realized that I can, but at my best, I'm not writing 2 Substack pieces a week, right? And even if I have enough audience to get them to do it, I'm not going to impose myself on people 2 times. They don't need to hear from me 2 times a week. They really don't. Honestly, I believe I say deep things. I think about them a long time. I craft the things I write so they work on 2 or 3 levels, one, like program or reprogram. It's working on like 3 levels at once. It's not that it's dense, but it's multidimensional stuff. And honestly, it takes a while to unpack. You if it's good writing, it should take a while to unpack. I'm not Tom Friedman who can write 2 pieces a week and they're the same, It's this anyway. As a Paul Krugman, I stopped reading Paul Krugman because it's like, how many times can you ring that bell? So I had to say, I'm not going to use these platforms the way they're asking me to use them. I'm going to write 1 or 2 Substacks a month. I'm going to go back to doing Team Human, my podcast, really every other week the way I used to. I used to start it, I was doing it every week, and my producer said, we're getting a lot of email from people saying it takes a week or 2 to really digest everything that happened in that episode. Can you slow down? Because they don't want, oh no, there's a whole other one. So I'm doing that, and I wrote a nice note to everybody saying, look, I'm going to be doing less content. Drop out if you want. It's really okay. We'll make this work. It's all good. And slowed it down and ended up back in that beautiful exploratory place. I meet about 1 person a month who I really, really have to do a Team Human conversation with. And I have about 1 or 2 big independent ideas that I want to share in a monologue once a month. And when I go down to that pace, life naturally supports it. I'm never searching for the idea or wondering, who can I interview next? It just happens in the natural unfolding. And then you get this much more organic and supported rhythm. Everything lines up, from the lunar cycles to my life cycles. It's like it all starts to feel like, oh, I'm the easiest thing to get to conform is the technology. The hardest thing to get to conform is your nervous system, is the sun, is the sky, is your life. So program reprogram really means understand the technology well enough to use it in a way that's compatible with you and your creative cycle, rather than trying to conform your humanity to it.
The kicker for me is that all it takes is for someone, whether that be yourself or anyone else, to subvert the expectations of more content wanting to be made for the sake of content, for then other people to be like, oh yeah, I guess I don't have to do this. It's like this domino effect of, and I've spoken about it before, where it's like, oh wait, I don't have to do this. It's almost as if like we need a little bit of a little reminder, a little poke. And those are not as frequent as they should be.
No, and I don't know if this is a little too heady, but let's play media environment. Partly it's because in the pre-digital age, the way we learned to moderate was through resistance, right? Resistance is an electrical term, if you think about it. It's a term from the electric era. Resistance is like sort of using a rheostat. You increase the resistance in order to sort of slow down or modulate the voltage. That doesn't work in a digital environment. It's not like resistance. Everything in a digital environment is like on or off, right? It's like resistance is futile on a sense. Right, but it doesn't mean you have to let it take over, but you have to learn to operate the gates. So it's like it's and that's fine. I mean, and we have old experience of that too. That's where, the Sabbath came from. It was a really simple, artificial way of saying 1/7 of your time, don't buy stuff, don't sell stuff. 1/7 of your time, you don't need to do anything in order to prove your value. You can just be, right? That's what Sabbath basically is. You're sacred just the way you are, like Mr. Rogers would tell us. And that, it's a simple way of doing it, but when am I, and that was why, again, then people are, oh, do I have to smash my iPhone because now it's really off? It's like, no, but you learn to withdraw sometimes. It's really the only way to do it.
But I think that goes back to kind of where we started, which is resistance, or I don't know, having to face the biases. They're really uncomfortable. It's really hard. And to put yourself in that position of resistance or friction or hurdle, who wants that? That's not fun.
Well, it is and it's not.
But
I mean,
I'm
so
of
if you
course.
realize that like the temporal bias, the time bias of digital technology is asynchronous, right? These things are not continuous. Digital technologies are always tick, 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 right? Human beings don't live in the ticks. We live in the space between the ticks, right? And digital technology, from those of us who were around using them in the old days, you weren't always on. You would log on to the technology, read a forum, you would download the forum, read the forum offline, create your response, then upload it, right? It was an asynchronous. It was like chess by mail. It's still chess by mail. It's just an always on asynchronous medium. So you're trying to live in real time with a technology that's not in real time. So of course it's going to drive you crazy. So is it that hard to say, oh, I mean, maybe it is for people, I'm making love now. I'm putting my, do not disturb on. People can still blast through that if they want, right? But it's like, you got you've got to get that strength. You're not leaving the net. You're just making your love, and it's fine to be unavailable. You used to be unavailable
Yeah.
all the time, a lot of the time. So, and then, looking at the increased availability online, it's like, do I want to be, and what does it mean when I'm available to everyone all the time? What has that done to my ability to think, to live? Who do I want to be available to all the time?
So I want to pick on that first command, which was time. Also, as a bit of a timeout, throw in your questions in the chat as we're going to open up in about 15 minutes or so. So keep the questions going. Let's start with that first bias, time. Is there a particular command that you believe that we have missed the mark on the most? What is the one command? Will that be time, place, choice, complexity, scale, identity, social, fact, openness, purpose, or now AI? Is there one particular bias that has felt the most complete
Yeah,
overshot?
I would say, because it was the most complex one, complexity, right? People understand when things are really, really complicated, but they haven't quite understood complexity. So when you try to deal with things that are really, really complicated, you create really complicated schemes and things to do it. So but when you understand that things are complex, you end up with sort of very simple, intuitive ways of dealing with things. So the easiest way to talk about the difference would be like, in a complicated world, we use traffic lights. Right? You stop, you go, it means that, you're going to have to sometimes be sitting there at night at a red light when there's no one there, and it's not actually very efficient, but you follow commands. It's easy to do if you're drunk or whatever. If you want to embrace complexity, you use a traffic circle. Traffic circle is super easy. There's two rules, right? Go to the right and yield to someone who's already in the circle. That's the whole thing. Two rules, and they work, and they can deal with so many more cars at the same time, and they're not that digital yes no thing. So as the world got complex and identity and all got complex, we and the world got more digital, we allowed ourselves to be bifurcated into right, left, Trump and everyone else. I guess my perspective, on all sides, though. So we see how the right wing got all, binary and paranoid and all, and afraid of the other, and obsessed with their whiteness or whatever. But it's harder to see how those of us on the left, or progressive politics and all, have ended up succumbing to the numerical, digital, quantized landscape of intersectionalism. Right. So understanding yourself as this, and that, I'm 0.3 Lebanese and 0.6 Jewish and 0.7 that and 9 points, where exactly do I fall on the gender spectrum and the this and the that? It's trying to kind of calculate your identity through a succession of Cartesian grids of intersections is still not embracing the complexity of human experience. And I get why we do it, especially now. Living in a digital landscape, you want to know your spot, your 3x, 4y. That's where I am. I get it, but it's a digital bias that we haven't that's one is really scary for us to shake, particularly the more time we spend in digital places where we have profiles and you've got to sort of establish performatively what you are, and it's like it's a character sheet from a fantasy role-playing game. It's nice, but you got to eventually kind of let go of that. You don't have to roll your 10-sided dice here. This is real life.
So complexity was the one that I had. The second place one that I think was perhaps most overlooked was, and I'm so glad you brought it up in that way, was identity. In that I think there's a really interesting tension here is when you ask or you look at the surveys, Gen Z, millennials, they feel overwhelmingly more themselves in online spaces than they do in offline spaces, which I think is a really interesting tension there.
They do, but I would argue, I had this chapter on identity, and it was the most controversial at the time, because what I argued was be yourself. I was arguing against anonymity in online spaces because I believed that the more anonymous people were, then the more mean they might be. And this was before Twitter existed. And, we see how that happened. There were all these anonymous accounts that could do really mean things. And I suggested that, be yourself online unless it's going to cause you actual harm. Like if you're a dissident in Iran and they're going to come to your house and kill you, then of course use anonymity selectively. And also because then when there's someone who's being anonymous online, we realize they're being anonymous because there's something there, because they're a 14-year-old trans kid in Idaho or someplace, and they need to be anonymous. Someone who's anonymous online, it should, in the world that I would live in, it's a call for help. Why are you having to maintain an anonymity? What do we do? How do we get you out of there? How do we help you, get to live as a real person again? So that was, a lot of that chapter was about being yourself, be who you are in these spaces, and integrate your real life with your online life rather than thinking of them as these two different things. What happened, and partly as a result of the marketing of identity politics by people who are exploiting the gender problem and race problems and all that for, political and capitalist ends, for really consumerist ends. They've kind of bastardized people's self and community derived notions of identity. And it's led to and these platforms, things like TikTok, where everything's a video, it's led to identity as performance rather than identity as a state of being, as your natural moment-to-moment expression of who you are. So if I'm going to perform Rushkoff, the male but slightly fey, intellectual, Jewish New Yorker dude, if I'm going to perform that for my device, it's going to be different and self-conscious compared to manifesting. And I feel like, yes, kids might say that they feel most themselves when they're in these spaces, but I would say it's because right now they feel most themselves when they're performing themselves rather than kind of just being themselves.
Which maybe goes back again to the bit of the discomfort of, I don't know, there's something about that word performance that I did my dissertation on Goffman, that like it is all performance, and it is now almost, I don't know, taken to such an extreme that, I don't know. Yeah,
Right.
it's
It's all performance. And that's the weird thing, is when it's all performance, there's no performance. It's like, it's weird. The I have a bias, a chapter in there on truth, and by truth and facts, really what I meant more was factoids and truthiness and memes, that we're moving towards nonfiction. But it goes back to the central problem that people had receiving this book. They can't engage with metaphor anymore. It's like we've gone from, and there were a lot of problems with it, we've gone from thinking the sort of the media of the West Wing, the sort of narrative fiction about reality, to reality TV. And reality TV is not real, as most people here know. Reality TV is all fixed. But the Apprentice wasn't real, right? But that reality then. The reason why that reality is comfortable is because there's no metaphor anymore. There's no analogy. It's flat. And when you get reality TV as your president, it's a strange. That's a strange word. And that, again, I would argue, is the digital media environment doing that to us. Digital doesn't do story so well. It does factoids, it does memes, it does layers.
Someone had an insight, which was they were upset about the number of people who go on the reality TV shows to become famous, to become influencers, to get their following, and how quote unquote fake they were, which is such an irony in that those people are more real than anyone else, in that their desires are so out in the open. With that said, I want to pick up the thread on the fact and fiction bit, because this is another bit that feels so far from where we unfortunately currently are. You wrote, the more valuable, truthful, and real our messages, the more they will spread and better we will do. We must learn to tell the truth. Where do we go? Where do we go with that one?
Right. I mean, in some ways, the greatest crime in a network is to put false data there. This is, the internet began as a externalized collective brain space, as our collective memory, really, is what it is. Even if sometimes memory, not to get technical, but everything in a computer is memory, right? There's the hard drive memory, but even your real time is memory, right? So corrupting memory is the sin of a shared digital data commons. It's not just about signal and noise. It's such a harm. It's such a violation. It's a violation. Which is why the most modern form of it is gaslighting. It's like, not only is this information bad, but I'm going to show you how you're crazy for not believing the stuff that your body just told you is not true. It's like, oh, your body is wrong. Here, take this pill. It's like, oof. It's, so I was a little bit more optimistic at the time, I guess, that truth would rise to the surface, that truth would win out. And I still kind of believe in that if you want to know the actual truth, you can go to Snopes, or you go to the right places. There's some stuff that we don't know the actual truth. Lab leak or spontaneous pangolin, we don't really, we don't know definitively. And so any opinion there is fine. You do your best, 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees Celsius, or this is going to happen. good luck. But the it's a shame. I mean, but also understanding that the whole digital environment was going to be more about facts and memes than it was about um, uh, uh, linear narrative. That there wasn't going to be quite that space for that. Was sort of the important thing. So I was trying to help people understand that, okay, so it's going to be all factoids. We're going to be living in a world where you basically are skipping stones, because that's how digital is, right? You can be going here to here to here to here to fact to fact to fact to fact without the storyteller giving you the continuous thing. And if you understand that, then don't put fake ones there, because this is our terrain.
I think that also brings up a larger, I don't think it's an irony, but coincidence or something here, which is, right, if we think about program or be programmed, programming in my interpretation is this mindfulness or empowerment to kind
Mm.
of take control. Yet, many have taken control and are programming, yet programming not reality. Programming myths, meanings, conspiracies, their own non-fact. And that to me is almost this larger kind of shadow to a lot of this, which is utterly fascinating.
Right. That right. Not only are they, I mean, on the one hand, a lot of the people who are doing uh, manipulative, coercive, and disempowering programming to others are people who are programmed themselves. So you look at a tech bro who is using their platform to manipulate and dehumanize others. Very often, that's somebody who's been programmed by corporate capitalism and doesn't even see investment banking as programmable. It's someone who's so programmed that even though they have 50 or $100 billion, they think they don't have enough. Right? So they're stuck in programming too. They just happen to have the skills to program others, or they went to Stanford and took BJ Fogg's course in persuasive technology, and they know the 10 sort of poker derived tricks for getting other people, speed seducing other people into despair and disempowerment. But again, it's why, maybe the easiest metaphor is, to be able to defend ourselves in this environment. You don't hire guards to protect you, but you learn kung fu. It's like the seven samurai kind of thing. You can go get seven samurai, or get like seven Shaolin priests to come and teach the whole town kung fu, right? And it's
Love it.
distributed, personal. You and that's sad but true. Maybe when power is distributed, um, we each need to become more personally responsible for maintaining our cognitive health. If you're living in a world where you're spending hours on screens and there are multi-billion-dollar companies on the other side of those screens trying to put you in a decalibrated state of panic, you can either opt out, which is hard, or learn how to metabolize this artillery. Learn how to metabolize the assault, how to see it, move through it. And that does require, it requires some liberal arts, critical thinking education. It does. In order to function as a coherent adult in a digital society, you have to grow up. It's kind of that simple. We got to grow up.
Perfect place. Perfect place to transition. I love it. I absolutely love it.
Uh,
The questions are coming in.
uh,
Let's get to the questions. We got a few. Okay. The first one Let's see. Here they are. The first one.
The first one that you're choosing to read, right?
Yes.
Because
Yes.
we are, and it's fine. We're not censoring. We're selecting.
Yes.
Right. All right. I wouldn't want
Yes.
people to think that
Yes,
they're
yes, yes.
being left. It's just he's using a process to see what's going to apply to the most people, what's going to help us in a narrative. So
Thank
please
you.
don't feel left out if your question isn't gotten to. You can always join Team Human. There's a Discord. We'll do some call-in shows. We'll get to you eventually in another forum.
Thank
We
you for
love you
getting
all.
me
Okay.
getting me off the hook. Thank you. Brennan Campbell asks, I attend a lot of live theater and have seen major drops in attendance across the board. Most people say they're too busy to go out, but I suspect they're actually just prioritizing things like Netflix or scrolling on their phone because it's a more guaranteed dopamine hit. Live shows can be very bad. But I'm more and more convinced that watching bad human art is necessary to denaturalize that algorithmic pace. I feel like I'm trying to pitch methadone to people who might not hit a traceable rock bottom. How do we tackle that?
Right. Two great questions in there. One is like, the second one is sort of like, how do we help people start 12 steps? What'll it take? But let's go back to the theater. The weird thing with the theater is, my daughter's graduated high school now, but I went to one of my neighbor's kids was in a middle school production of something. And, I went and saw it, and it was a fucking delight, and it's not that it was, Broadway quality or that they were there. It was the ritual itself. And I remember thinking this the first time I went and saw a play. I was like 5 years old, saw Zero Mostel and Fiddler on the Roof. And the main thing I was thinking is all the people in the chairs are being quiet while the ones on the stage are doing the stuff. And I was like, this is so weird. I could get up and shout, right? But I'm going to choose not to. And just that aspect of the ritual was itself thing. And then it's like, oh, it must be because what's happening on the stage is kind of important and they practiced it and because they really think it's important and they put music and all this lights on it. Just that, whatever the thing is enough. But I get it. It's like that magic moment in the theater when you sit down in the chair and the lights kind of go down. They call it the magic moment because you're like, ooh, what's going to happen? For most of us, it's like, oh my God, please don't make this a bad thing. Don't make this bad. Because you're in a room, you can't get up during it because they're right out. It's like, it's very captive compared to swipe left. It's gone. I don't like it. Swipe left, swipe left, swipe. You just keep swiping through it. You can't swipe a theater play. Like, I think like Chauncey with the remote, he would try to, change things in the world. It's in this movie Being There, television era, but it's the beginning of digital, right? I really think the remote control was the first step toward digital. But yeah, theater is where I came from. That was my background till I was 33. I was a theater director. And I left the theater because it had gotten so elitist. It was so expensive for people to go. And the internet came and I thought, here's going to be the people's medium where we're actually going to play together and do this stuff and collaborate and it'd be interactive. It's so funny. I was so idealistic. I thought it'd be the people's landscape. Yeah. Again, I wouldn't say, because I'm trying not to use this phrase, how do we get people back into the theater as opposed to on there? Really, that's what the whole afterword of this book is about, is not trying to manipulate others. Like, how do I get people to care about the climate? How do I get people to start local currencies? That's a digital, instrumentalized understanding of humans, right? A programmatic understanding of humans. Don't. It's like, but how can we create a society that engenders theater? Got to start bringing theater back to school. Get the iPads out and the enactments in. Go back to show and tell. You should do show and tell K through 12. You should be doing show and tell. Show and tell is the whole thing, that here's something that I find interesting. Here's why. And I'm going to tell you that's it. That's what theater is to a large extent. It's to show while telling. So yeah, I'm all for it. What will it take? until people have the kind of realization you're asking for? I don't know. I hit a rock bottom myself sort of last summer with all this stuff, and the way I was also engaging with my life in that very responsible for rather than responsible to fashion. All these implied obligations in how I had put on myself. It took a while to liberate without feeling like, oh, am I just being selfish? Is it selfish? I mean, listen, this sounds friggin' insane, right? You'll hear my neurosis. The reason I didn't meditate was because I thought it was selfish to take 20 minutes to sit when I could be answering 10 more emails from people who want something. I could give one more book blurb, do one more thing. But the impact on my coherence was such that I did hit bottom. I did ceremony, which basically said, stop or die. You're just going to die, Doug. That's what I got from the ceremony. I was like, okay, then I'm allowed to stop, right? Because my life's at risk. I can start living differently. But I don't know what it will take us to hit bottom, and I'm hoping we don't have to hit bottom to begin the 12 steps, realizing we're part of something greater than ourselves, making amends, all those things. I mean, you don't have to really read the book and do it, but all those things are really the rule set for a positive anarchic society, of bottom-up organization and mutual aid.
Mm-hmm. I love it. I dig it. I dig it.
Can you dig it? You warriors, people. Yeah.
I'm being fed another one by Dara Brown. I love that you brought up autonomy now and in the book 15 years ago. Ironically, I used to view the internet as a quote-unquote safe place to be myself anonymously until you kind of figure it out that since you could be whoever you wanted to be back in the day out of the early internet. Now, it's ironically all about branding or being attached to your name. Have you found this change in the internet helpful? Or has it mostly been bad, i.e. taken on that horrible capitalistic hellscape of Instagram being a business and people get stuck in doom scrolling? In positive ways, people otherwise, without options or without a option, have made themselves comfortable financially. But as well, people do it for likes, whatever that is. What are your thoughts?
It's hard. I remember when the internet was a place to play. And yeah, you could basically go, you could do drag in one way or another. I could be a 14-year-old Japanese boy. I could be a dog. I could be gay, straight, male, female, old, young, and try on different aspects of my own personality. And in spaces, especially in spaces where we knew not everyone was who they were pretending to be, right? There were specific places for that, whether they were MUDs or dungeons or certain IRCs. There were places where that was, and it was a great thing. And you didn't know to some extent whether something was true or not, or who they were or what on the internet. And it kind of didn't matter. I would have discussions on Usenet with people about stuff, and I didn't know where they're from or how old they were. It was just because that was the thing. That was the thing that was almost fun about it. When I was writing the book originally, it was after the net had become serious. There was a big bank. I was an internet expert, I guess, in the early days, 93, 94, 95, only because nobody else knew anything about it, right? I was one of the very first New Yorkers to be writing about it in national publications. That was still the time when my first publisher, Bantam, canceled my book Siberia because they thought the internet would be over by 1993 when the book was supposed to come out, right? I would be laughed out of editors' offices for saying, I think someday you're going to be using something called email. You're going to have a computer on this desk. It was that crazy moment when no one believed that anything could happen. And when that was going on, one of the major banks called me, and they wanted to talk to me about becoming their head of global internet banking. Right? This is an acid-taking counterculture novelist. I didn't even have my PhD yet. I was just this one of us. And I remember I took the meeting, and I'm like, why the hell would you do that? You can't. I was like, you can't put a bank on the internet. The internet is a bunch of crazy people talking about fractals and weird stuff. Why would you do that? Plus, the way the internet is I mean, at least then, the way the internet is built, it's all these really promiscuous servers saying, hello, do you have anything for me? My name is Douglas. Give me something and let me taste what you have. That was all of it. Just gimme. You don't put a bank on that. I'm like, if you want to put a bank, you make your own friggin' thing. Let people dial in and don't do this. And they did. And once they put business online, it wasn't just that it commercialized us and made us think of ourselves as corporations and every identity as a website and all that. That was already sort of happening. It's that it became serious. There's money at stake. Now your identity is your credit card and you're this and you're that. And that really did change the texture of the experience, from what felt like a rave, to something very different.
I think we have time for one more.
Oh my gosh, we're that far in. It's 1:59. Okay,
we did it.
Yeah.
One more from Jonah. If intersectionalism is not capturing the complexity of identity, what models or theories do you recommend looking towards or charting a path towards? Apologies if I misheard the remark on intersectionalism and complexity.
I mean, it's hard for me to talk about it because my intersections are currently privileged ones. I mean, they haven't always historically been, but right now, being a whitish, cis-presenting Jew, pretty good as far as as far as this goes. So it's difficult for me to talk about it because I don't want to suggest that the reality of the limited agency of people with different genders, colors, and things than me are experiencing. But what I am trying to point out, and I thank the person with the question for acknowledging it. What I am trying to point out is that this sort of digital style quantization and quantization of identity doesn't really work, right? It's actually not complex enough. It's too it's almost too defined and not consonant with the actual diaspora of indigenous peoples over time. I think what I prefer is, if I had to put a guess, and more from my experience with people like Tyson Yunkaporta and all, and other indigenous people, is understanding ourselves through a series of what he would call yarns. Through these yarns, through particular kinds of sort of teaching stories. When I meet someone who's different, what are your stories? Your actual histories and the stories you use to understand how this all works. That, to me, that's what a people are. When I met the Maori in New Zealand, and all we did was share stories. I was sharing Bible stories and what they meant to me, and they're sharing their stories, and I was saying the story of the internet and the story. So to understand it, I know it doesn't necessarily take the pigment perfectly into account, but it takes a lot into account, because some of the original so-called intersections had to do with ablement and disablement. I mean, that can be conveyed in story. The story of my movement, my journey with movement, my journey with sight or lack of sight, the journey of my people as an oppressed people. For me, it would be the story of my great grandfather being hanged in his store window on the first night of the Kishinev pogrom, and what happened to my grandfather thrown in the well. And then when you share your story, as far back as you can go, or even your story of your dislocation from your story, your dissociation from that, then what's replaced those blood stories? You end up with a much more full spectrum traffic circle approach to identity that's less compatible with the digital media environment's need for everything to be given a metric.
On that note, Douglas, thank you so, so, so much. Everyone who is here, thank you so, so, so much. Program or Be Programmed, out now. Thank you.
Get it, steal it. It's fine. Get it at the library. If you don't want to buy it, just get it at the library. And if they don't have it, say, "Oh, you need the new one, please."
Love it. On that note, everyone,
thank you.
so,
Thanks
so,
everybody
so much
for coming. It means a whole lot to me that you came out for this. It's as much as a webinar as we were hoping, just a celebration that, yay, we're here and books exist and we have people like Matt in this world.
Thank you. Back at you.
Thank you.
Complexity, nuance, friction, becoming adults. We're doing it. We're doing it.
One day at a time.
Thanks, everyone.